Upstate, and we are live for our second virtual Tree ID tour. If you're just coming on, send us a wave. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We're so thrilled at the response for our first Tree ID tour last week. We looked at 8 different trees. Today we're going to look at something in that range, and we'll have a few flashbacks, so we'll see what you guys remember about the trees we looked at last week. If you have any questions, just comment as they pop up, and we'll try to answer them as we're walking or at the end of the tour, so feel free to send those in. And we're so excited that you guys are here today. Just send us a wave as you're joining, and we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to make sure I talk clearly into the phone today, because I know there were a few audio problems last time. So today we're going to take a look at our first tree. This is an eastern hemlock. And so we can shift the phone to look at our tree. So the eastern hemlock is a conifer that has needles. It's an evergreen tree, and it's really easy to spot that it's an evergreen tree because it's got these nice little buds of fresh growth right at the end. So you can see the color difference with the light green versus the dark green needles from previous year's growth. So the hemlock, it's got very flat needles. And then if you turn it over, you can see 2 white lines on the underside of each needle. And so that's characteristic of this species. A real problem for this species is the hemlock woolly adelgid. So if you've ever been to Smoky Mountain National Park or anywhere like that, you might see a lot of dead trees, a lot of trunks with dead branches just hanging out all over the park from any viewpoint you look at. That's because the hemlock woolly adelgid has killed most of the hemlock trees in the park. And so we're lucky to have some here where we're walking today. It's a really cool tree. And in fact, the new leaves, the new growth that we just looked at, the bright green stuff, you can use that to make a tea that's high in vitamin C. So it's got some fun little attributes there. This tree, it's a larger tree. You'll find it growing in the woods and forests. It'll get around 40 to 70 feet tall. A beautiful shape. I don't know if you can pan the phone to kind of look up. It is a little bit temperamental though. It likes to have good quality soil, and it's pretty particular about its site conditions. So a beautiful species, and we're going to cross the street now and take a look at another evergreen tree. The next tree that we're going to take a look at is a broadleaf evergreen, similar to the magnolia we looked at last week, but this is our American holly. So the American holly, it's our broadleaf conifer. It's got a simple leaf, and it's an alternate leaf arrangement. And if you take a close look, you're not just seeing leaves up there, but you're seeing those small white flowers. So this tree is really interesting because it's what we call a dioecious species. So a tree species could be either monoecious or dioecious. And so a tree species that is monoecious means that it has male and female reproductive parts on the same tree. A species that is dioecious has male reproductive parts on one tree and female reproductive parts on another tree. The female reproductive parts of a tree are the flower. And so the flower, when it, inside the flower is the ovary, and when that ovary ripens, it becomes the fruit. So if you have a fruit tree, it's really important to know if you have a monoecious or dioecious species, because if it is dioecious, you definitely want a female tree if you're trying to grow fruit. So the holly is a dioecious species, so only female trees will have flowers, and those flowers will ripen and turn into those little red berries. And so we all know holly trees from the popular Christmas carol, right? Deck the halls with boughs of holly, fa la 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 la. So hollies have a really famous reputation. That song and many other Christmas decorations are really based on European hollies, but we have our own here in the US, the American holly. It's really popular in the woods, and it has a great tolerance for wet feet. So if you're looking for an evergreen to plant in a flooding zone, the American holly is a great candidate. It gets around 30 to 50 feet tall, around 20 feet wide, and it's a great tree. Another great feature about it is the bark. If you take a close look at the bark, it's really smooth. So it actually kind of competes with our American beech tree for people trying to carve into it because it's got that nice smooth look to it. So very noticeable bark. And then of course the leaves have these sharp edges, these pointy things. And so if you're trying to, you know, protect your house from burglars or something like that, holly can be a great thing to plant where you don't want people to be. All right. Moving on to our next tree. We're gonna take a look at a honey locust. So this one actually fooled me because when I first walked up to it, the little guy, I thought it might be a mimosa tree because we see those growing all up everywhere because they're an invasive species. And it does look relatively similar to this honey locust leaf. So if we take a close look, some of the leaves on this tree, interestingly enough, we have, you know, this is going to be one of our deciduous broadleaf trees, and the leaf is not simple. As you can see, it is a very compound leaf, and so this leaf is what we call bipinnately compound. So just like the hickory that we looked at last week, it is compound in a pinnate fashion, like a pin in a linear way. And so everything is emerging off of this line. And it's bipinnate, meaning that it's doubly pinnately compound, right? We have it this way, and then we also have it this way. And so this here is one leaf. Each leaflet has around 15 or so, each one of these has around 15 or so leaflets. And if you take a close look, what really keyed me to that this species was not a mimosa is because the line here coming through the leaflet is in the center. And then on a mimosa tree, on those leaflets, the line is at the very margin of the leaf, to the very side, but the honey locust is in the center. Another key identifying feature of this tree is the thorns. So if you can get up close here, take a look. That is a large thorn. It's around 1.5 inches long, and it is very pokey, very pointy, and it's really tough. It's made of the wood. It's not, you know, like a rose thorn. It's a very tough thorn. So this tree is part of the legume family, and so it has those large seed pods. They're around this size, and you can actually eat the goop that's inside, although you might not want to eat too much of it because it could give you some digestive issues. But this tree is a wonderful tree, and there are thornless versions available. It's a popular street tree, especially if you get up into the Midwest or the Northeast. We see it a lot more up there, but you will find it in the forest down here. If you're hiking around Lake Conisee Nature Park, when it opens back up, you might see this tree in some areas over there. It gets around in the mid-range, similar to a hickory. It's going to get around 60 feet tall and 30 feet wide. So it's a really nice tree to have. It gives you that feathery, dappled shade. All right, the next tree we're going to look at is very popular. You see it all over the streets, you see it all over the forest. It might even be growing in your backyard. It's definitely growing in mine. We are going to look at this water oak, Quercus nigra. And so water oaks are very common. An easy way to identify the tree is by the bark. So if you're looking at the bark, you might see these vertical lines in the tree, and you might see these white spots of lichen coming up the tree. And so as you're walking along, you know, I know there's a lot of these at the zoo when that opens back up, a lot of them in Cleveland Park, even just walking downtown. In fact, if you've ever been to Furman University and walked around the mall at Furman, the trees that the campus is famous for, that they're actually replacing, in the process of replacing right now, they used to be water oak trees. And so the water oak trees typically are having a lifespan anywhere from 80 to 100 years is very common, especially for an urban tree. And so, you know, it's a fast grower, which is common with anything with a shorter lifespan, but it doesn't live quite as long as we might like it to. And so at Furman, you know, the project that they're doing is replacing these aging water oaks with trees that live at least twice as long. So they're really focusing on overcup oaks and nuttall oaks, and you know, especially anything in that white oak group is going to be more resistant to diseases and mistletoe, things like that. And we'll take a close-up look at the leaf here. And so most oak trees have lobed leaves. Now the water oak has a little bit less of a lobe, but you do see these three kind of lobes at the end of the leaf here. So it's got a narrow start, and it might have three lobes, or they might not be very noticeable at all. And so that's kind of characteristic for your water oak leaf. We've got the vertical striations in the bark, and then we've got a leaf that may or may not have three lobes at the end, a narrower leaf for an oak. All right, next up we're going to take a look at an invasive species. We are going to look at a white mulberry. Now earlier with the holly we talked about species that could be monoecious or dioecious. It's very interesting because the white mulberry could be both. Some trees are monoecious, which have male and female parts in the same tree, and some species are dioecious, male or female only. So the mulberry is very interesting in that regard. Now the mulberry does produce an edible fruit, and what's very interesting about it is similar to the sassafras tree that we looked at last week. The mulberry tree has leaves that are different shapes. And so here you can see we have that, similar to the sassafras, we have that mitten leaf, and then we have, you know, the entire leaf here, and then we have the three forks of the leaf. So lots of different leaf shapes on this tree. Even up here, you can see we have several lobes on the leaf. Now what's different about this tree is that the leaves are serrated. And if you look at the base of the leaf, it's got that cordate shape, kind of like the top of a heart. And it always has a point. And what's really interesting is that with all these different leaf shapes, this tree actually doesn't maintain different leaf shapes through its whole age. And so as the tree matures, most of the leaves look like this one, without the funky lobes, without the asymmetrical pieces. Most of the leaves are just plain like this. And so it will be very different to identify an older mulberry that's established versus a young one like this that has lots of different leaf shapes. So what you're really looking for is the serrated edge, the cordate base, and you know, it's one of those fast-growing trees, typical of our invasive species. So, you know, again, that produces the edible fruit, and you'll know that it's the white mulberry, which is invasive, because the leaves are going to be a little bit shiny, and it's the most common one that we have around. Oh, we're walking right by it. The next tree that we're going to look at is the Carolina silverbell, Halesia carolina. And so this tree is a beautiful understory tree in our forest. It's a wonderful specimen to plant in your yard if you kind of have an edge of woods area. It really likes to be in a sheltered place. So it's going to get around 40, 50 feet tall, somewhere in that range, probably, you know, more towards 40 feet. And it has beautiful flowers. They're white flowers and they're shaped like a bell, which is how it gets its name. So they hang down from the tree. So the best view to look at these flowers is looking up. And so this tree has a very simple leaf. So if you take a close look at it, you can see that it does have a serrated edge, but those serrations are very small. It's a simple leaf. It's going to be a broadleaf deciduous species. It's alternating leaf arrangement. And the flowers, they've already bloomed here already. But what's really interesting is taking a look at the fruit. And the fruit, it almost looks like a star fruit. It's very unique in that way. It's got these four sides to it, And it almost reminds me of kind of a Christmas tree ornament. So that's the Carolina silver bell. All right. The next tree that we're going to look at is another oak. And so we're going to get into a little bit. There's two groups of oaks, and this will really help us because there are over 400 species of oaks in the world. And so narrowing them down into two different groups is immensely helpful. The two different groups that we're using are the red oak group and the white oak group. So the first tree that we're going to look at falls in the red oak group. In fact, we call it a southern red oak. And so the southern red oak, let's take a look at the leaf of the tree. So this is the big guy right here. As you can see, the live leaves aren't really very close to the ground, so we found some dead ones to take a closer look at. So what we're noticing first and foremost about these leaves, when we're talking about the red oak group versus the white oak group, the red oak group is going to have bristles at the end of the lobes. So if you can see right here, I've got this pointy little bristle right at the end of the lobe. And you can see it again here. And when we look at a tree from a white oak, which, spoiler alert, is coming next, the white oak is going to have a rounded lobe. And so that's one of the key differences that we're looking for. And the red oak group and the white oak group, a lot of it we think about the color of the wood, but really it's helping us just narrow down what species we could be looking at. So the southern red oak is in our red oak group. It's called Quercus falcata. And this is a larger tree. It likes to be in the sandy uplands, but it seems pretty content right here. We're at the top of a hill, and as you can see, it's really thriving. But characteristic of these leaves, you know, kind of what set it apart from other red oaks, it's got this cup shape here at the bottom, where it pretty steep, comes up vertically. And then, you know, as you saw with some of those other leaves, they don't all have this exact shape, but it's similar. And so we have the bristles, and then this kind of trident shape is very common with this tree. But you'll also find slightly variated shapes of the leaf. All right. Now, as promised, we have our white oak, Quercus alba. So looking up at this giant tree, you can see the bark is very easy to identify a white oak tree with. And we look at the bark because it has those vertical rectangular plates that almost look like they're peeling from the tree. So that's a very good factor to be identifying your white oak trees with. And then of course, as we look up into the canopy of the tree, we see those very characteristic oak leaves with all of the lobes. And let's see if we can find a nice white oak tree on the ground over here to take a closer look at those rounded lobes. Bit of an older one, but here's your characteristic white oak leaf. And so there's no bristles at the end of the lobes. All of them are rounded. Now, fun fact, we did look at our water oak tree a few trees back. That one is a little bit of a tricky one. A lot of people don't see the bristle and they assume that it is in the white oak group, but it actually, some leaves do have a bristle. So the water oak, the Quercus nigra, is in the red oak group. Right now we're looking at the white oak. And an interesting feature about this tree, of course, it's, you know, the majestic shape of it. It's the grandfather tree of the forest. And so it's just a stunning species, and it's very popular with wildlife. Deer eat every part of the tree. It attracts birds, it attracts small animals. Lots of animals love this tree. It provides food for a lot of animals in the forest. So it's great for that. And fun fact about this tree, you know, during our quarantine and our social distancing, I'm sure lots of you have been enjoying some wine some whiskey. And so white oak is what barrels are made of. When we have our, oak Chardonnay or our oak barrel whiskey, it's from the white oak tree because it has a special element to it that seals off the wood for liquids. So, fun fact there. All right. Here's it back here. We're passing our next tree. Where is it?
You looking for the redbud?
Oh, we can do this one first. All right, so this tree is a mockernut hickory, Caria tomentosa. So if you were with us last week, you might remember that we looked at a pignut hickory. And so this one's similar to our pignut hickory, right? We live in an oak hickory forest. So these species are very common. It's a broadleaf deciduous tree. And this guy is one leaf. So we've got that pinnately compound leaf again. And so we've got the stalk of the leaf, and then this one has 7 leaflets. So the mockernut hickory has 7 to 9 leaflets, while the pignut that we looked at last week has 5 to 7. And if you take a real close look at the mockernut hickory, and I don't know if you remember, we mentioned this last week, the way that you really tell it apart from the pignut hickory is that the stalk of the leaf is hairy, it's furry, and if you turn it over, you might be able to see on the camera the underside of the leaf is also furry. So that's really characteristic of this tree. And if you smell it, which you can't do through the phone, it does have a really fragrant smell, especially in comparison to the pignut hickory. Now the mockernut hickory gets its name because the shell of the hickory nut it produces is very large. However, the meat inside is just a tease. It's just a small amount. It's mocking us. So it's the mockernut hickory. So this one will be a similar size to our pignut hickory in the range of 50 to 60 feet tall, kind of that mid-range of our forest. And you can see it like similar sites to our white oak. So let's head back this way. There's one more tree that we're going to look at today, and it's a popular one. A lot of you might have it planted in your yards. It is an eastern redbud, Cercis canadensis. And so the eastern redbud, I love to remember the name of this tree because of the shape of the leaves. And so the shape of the leaf is almost shaped like a heart. And so I remember that a heart is the color red and it symbolizes budding love. So there you have it, eastern redbud. Now the eastern redbud already flowered this year. It has those purple flowers that stick very close to the stem and sometimes even to the trunk. Whenever I drive up to Asheville, I always see those purple flowers poking out of the highway, and they bloom in early March. So they're one of the earlier species to bloom, which is pretty cool, and they bloom without any leaves on the tree. So it is a beautiful species to watch in that regard. And then after the bloom, you'll have legume type of fruits. Just like the honey locust, the redbud is in the legume family. And so it has smaller bean-shaped fruits, and you probably can't see them in the tree back there, but they're green this time of year, but they stay on the tree almost year-round in a more brown color. We did post a tree trivia photo last week, so if you are looking to find out what they look like, take a look at that. But redbud is a really nice tree to plant if you don't have a lot of space. It gets about 20 to 30 feet tall and wide. And it's very popular with birds and other pollinators, even butterflies, especially since it flowers so early in the season. There's not a lot of other trees blooming at that time, so a lot of those species are really looking for that food source and that nectar. So, did we have any questions come up? We're at the end of our walk.
I don't think so.
And if you have any questions, please comment below. Send me an email, Kylie@TreesUpstate.org. We'd love to help you identify the tree that's in your yard on your neighborhood walk. It's a time for learning. So thank you so much for joining us today. We had fun. Hopefully everybody learned something. Send us your questions and tune in again next week, Tuesday at 11:30 for installment number 3 in our virtual Tree ID series. We'll see you then.